So number one is obvious, but they're very lightweight shelters across all price points. If you go from entry level to high end, you can get a shelter that's extremely light if you use a tarp. Number two is they're cheap. Obviously, because it's just a flat piece of fabric, even the more complicated ones are more simple to make and use less fabric than an equivalent tent, so they're going to be much cheaper. You can get an entry level tarp for under $100 all the way up to the highest end tarp for something like $300 made of DCF. Number three is they're simple. They're so simple you can make them yourself. So one of my first do-it-yourself homemade gear projects was sewing a tarp, and this tarp here is one that I also sewed myself. It's a tapered tarp, just dead easy. One main seam to sew and then just the perimeter. It's really hard to beat the satisfaction of spending a night outside using equipment that you made yourself. If you're interested in something like that, a tarp is a great place to start. Number four is they're adaptable and modular. I have several different tarps, from very simple flat tarps to more complicated shaped tarps like pyramids, and pair those with different types of ground sheets, different types of bug bivvies. I can mix and match those to cover a huge variety of conditions. Number five, which I think is hugely underrated, is the small packed size. The smaller all of your gear, the smaller the bag you can use, and just in general have a less bulky and cumbersome setup. Number six is a small footprint for sleeping. So a tent, you need to have, whatever the dimensions of the tent are, you need to have that space on the ground that's clear and free to sleep. Whereas with the tarp, I've set it up on top of bushes. I've done all kind of weird things where all I had was a small spot where I could lay down to sleep, and I could just get the tarp over that. Number seven is there's no poles or zippers to break. I've broken poles, and zippers wear out. There's much less chance that you damage a tarp and it becomes a problem on a trip. It makes them very robust and durable shelters. Number eight is that they make really great group shelters. If you're out on a group trip, and let's say there's four of you and there's bad weather, the person who has a tarp normally becomes the hero, because you end up having this massive awning that you can eat under and kind of relax together in bad weather. There's no other shelter that offers you that. It's such a useful tool that a lot of people bring a tarp just as the group shelter when they're on a group trip. Number nine is ventilation and separation. Air can freely move through compared to a tent that's kind of sealed down with the fly. So that movement of air means you have hardly any moisture that accumulates. Most tent flies come very close down to the ground, as if you had a plastic bag upside down over some grass, and it would just get dampness inside and condensation. The exact same thing happens with a tent in my experience. Just because it's pinned down so close to the ground, you're kind of inevitably gonna get condensation, even in conditions where you wouldn't expect to get any. This is a perfect example here. I'm pitched on kind of grassy, damp ground. There was basically no real condensation or moisture to speak of that accumulated in my tent because it was so far off the ground. Number 10, which is I think probably the most important one, is that you set it up first and last. If you're in inclement weather and there's a lot of rain, it's really satisfying to be able to set up your roof first and then deal with your gear underneath. Same thing in the morning. Such a game changer to be able to stay under your tarp, put away all your gear, and then right before you go, take down your tarp and throw it in an outside pocket of your bag and just get going. It's really frustrating if you've got a tent, because at some point you either have to pack up that tent before you go or something, and you end up in the rain. Your tent body gets soaked from the rain. It's true for setting up, it's true for packing up your camp. That's just one of the number one reasons for me to use a tarp, because it offers you that protection from rain when you get to camp and when you're leaving camp. Number 11 is a bonus. A tarp really makes a great emergency tool to have in your bag, even on day trips or anything like that. Instead of an emergency, a little cheap emergency tarp or an emergency bivvy or a space blanket. If you have a good quality tarp that doesn't weigh too much, doesn't cost too much, it's just so easy to just throw that in your bag whenever you go out. And that can just pay off huge for all kinds of things. It can be from being out on a day hike and getting caught in a big rainstorm, well, then you've got a nice shelter that you can get under. And again, if you're with a group, you're going to be the hero for that one. In terms of more of an emergency situation, if I have to spend a night out, I'd rather spend it under my tarp that I camp out under all the time versus some little dinky emergency tarp or a little bivy bag type thing. You can make a makeshift stretcher out of it. You can wrap a person in it if they get hurt and they need to be carried off the mountain, help keep them warm, or if it's raining or anything like that. So you've got this tool that just works for all kinds of different things. If you're still on the fence about using a tarp for your backpacking trips, check out this video where I talk about my experience using tarps for camping.